Okay, thank you very much. We are now at session 4, which is focusing on financing sanitation and sanitation as a business. For those who have just joined us, my name is Doreen Barlow. I work for the GIZ Sustainable Sanitation Program, and I will be chairing this session with my colleague who will introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Regina Rossman. I just got here from the airport, so I'm happy I didn't miss it. I'm a colleague of Doreen's, also working for GIZ, based in Eschborn, in the water policy team. Yes.
Now, it's already been highlighted in the welcome keynote of Mike Engsgaard, and in accordance with the SDG 6 synthesis report, that the current financial resources are inadequate to achieve SDG 6. The World Bank estimated that the annual capital costs of meeting SDG targets 6.1 and 6.2 alone are 114 billion per year. And this does not include the SDG all the other SDG 6 targets. It also doesn't include operation and maintenance. It doesn't include monitoring, institutional support, sector strengthening, or human resources. So with that in mind, I want us to utilize this session to reflect on the business opportunities that we currently have in our sector. In addition to that, I also want us to think of the financial investments that are required for us to push the sector forward in terms of infrastructural investment and reaching the targets that are currently stipulated within SDG 6. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome now Mr. Ismail Shaiye, who is the first speaker of this session. And Ismail Shaiye is the Chief Executive Officer of the Water Sector Trust Fund in Kenya. And he joined the fund in November 2014. And he will provide us an overview of the pro-poor decentralized treatment facilities that have been constructed under the APSA program in Kenya. So Ismail, welcome and thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know if this is good enough. Thank you, Doreen, for the excellent introduction. I don't know if I'm clear enough. I'm not used to this. Oh, good. Thank you. So very quick. Yeah, and I like it. I like telling my staff by telling a story. Where I come from and where Doreen comes from, ideally, we always say, we talk about the B word. Any investment that doesn't sound like you are talking about billions is not good enough. But with partnership with some of our partners, and I will say this to anyone who comes from developing countries, technical assistance has not been rated well. If you ask me, when MasterCard says in its advert, priceless, for me, technical assistance is what I will call priceless. And I remember talking to the German, addressing the German Bundestag, because they're trying to pull away from our country in the water sector. I think they invested over 45 years. And I told them, it's like you have taught us how to dance. And there was a tune playing at the background. And finally, I know how to dance, I know the moves, but the music is, basically, you put off the music. But I still know how to dance, because I thought, you taught us how to move. So that is how I rate technical assistance, because it really played a key role in this process. 80% of, in our country are using on-site sanitation still. It's only 20% that are connected to the conventional sewage system. And still, when I go to every town in Kenya, they will say, when are you going to do for us the conventional sewage system? But we tell them the success of this right now, because at that time, it was like a stopgap measure. In fact, even the TAs, they used to say, oh, meanwhile, you'll use this for 10 years. You'll use this for 20 years. No. Folks, it's working, and I'll share with you the statistics. I can confidently tell anybody right now that get used to it. Because, the buzzword is, we want a 20 billion, we want a 15 billion conventional sewage facility. This, folks, is working for us. And I was able to get the attention of the president a couple of months ago. For 6 minutes, I told him that in your agenda, because he wants to leave a legacy, every small town in Kenya should have this. If you come from where I come from, you can drive in the streets and see a bunch of shit in the middle of the road. Somebody somewhere last night dumped that stuff in the middle of the road. It takes months to clean, and you can imagine the hazard that that will cause to the public. It has been happening, and it's still happening, but we're trying to see how we can address those kind of issues. So the process, I'm a strong believer of saying that how do you bring in the private sector? And I always say that it's more or less like much as I like the private sector to get involved in this process, I also am not for the idea of forced marriage, where you pull somebody and say, hey, you're the private sector, come and work with this. No, there has to be need, folks. Let the private sector seduce us. Let us talk. Otherwise, if you force them, by the end of the program, you know, they will take their own. But this program really made me think, because the exhausters and the guys who are doing this business are actually the private sector, and they have been doing it before. So, like the Americans say, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. I'm a strong believer of that, and that actually was maintained in this process. So basically, if you have been to a third world country, it's the way it is. In fact, I went with a colleague from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I don't know if somebody's representing here. But when we went there, the trucks started driving in. And he was like, Ismail, did you know that this was, I was going to be here, and they know that's why you have 4 trucks? I said, no, hell no. In fact, it was raining. I don't even know why they are struggling to go to that, bush place. But it happened. Why? Because it was, private sector driven. So basically, the process, and I can share with you later, you'll see it in the whole value chain. We tried to address the whole value chain of sanitation. That was the whole idea. Just to give you a quick intro, and I don't want to dwell on this, as a fund, we call it something that I actually connoted with my team. We call it an investment. If you heard of the sushi menu kind of concept, I don't want to call our projects because that's a cliche nowadays. But if you call it an investment, we're dealing with funds here. So by calling it an investment, somehow you can say, somebody will take it a little bit serious. So within our investment, we have rural, where we cover rural Kenya. So even for our donors, our partners who we work with, this is the sushi menu that we share. You either put your money in rural, you either put your money in urban, or you put in water resource, which also now, because of the climate change angle that we're trying to seek for money, we change to water resource and climate change. And then result-based financing. For rural, I don't know how to explain this. We do everything and anything that you can think about, water, infrastructure, governance, sanitation in that component. Same thing for urban. Same thing for urban, where this program comes in, UPSAP, that I'm going to explain later. And then water resource. Our concept is from the source. When you open a tap, think about the source where that water is coming from, and we usually invest in the source. Finally, result-based financing. Grants are dwindling. And we know that our partners are actually tired, let me put it that way, of the investment that they put. I was not amazed when I went to the German Bundestag and they said, Ismail, we're out. Sorry, you're coming in late. But I said, fine. We are thinking of other ways. We're thinking of other ways that we can actually invest. So result-based financing is one way, where a water company can go to a bank, present a bankable proposal, and they get funding. Where we come in is we incentivize that by giving them a subsidy to that effect. So I'm being told I need to hurry. So under this program, we have partnered with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and GIZ, implemented by Water Sector Trust Fund. And we are trying to reach out to over 400,000 beneficiaries by the end of 2018. Right now, I can comfortably say that we got that extension. So, the target beneficiaries. I can tell you in my country, it's illegal for anybody, any civil society or government to build a toilet for nobody, basically. So you have to apply and show interest. In fact, most of the water companies actually had a waiting list of 5,000 individuals who wanted to pay for them to be part of this. That's why we're going for the 5th round right now. So these are the targeted counties. We have over 25 counties right now that are benefiting from the same. And we are targeting low-income areas. In fact, to give credit to GIZ and also UN Habitat, we developed a system whereby for you to make the application to us, you have to show the low-income area within. So if you go to Magidata in our website, you will see every slum in our country, be it Nairobi or the surrounding areas, and then you have to say, I'm targeting that area. So it's very specific, and there was a specific criteria for you to apply. It involved, from the toilet, storage, emptying, transporting, treating, and the safe disposal of the fecal sludge. Again, I'm repeating the same process in pictorial form. This is the one that we are doing at Doreen in Machakos. It's on the road. Everybody actually who comes to Kenya, we can show you guys. And I think I received delegation from Botswana the other day. Ghanaians were there. We have shown a lot of other surrounding countries what we are doing in this area. So basically, why is it successful? The fee is market-driven. It's just getting the political will from the governors to say, allow these people to go in and do what they're supposed to be doing. So the water company is in charge, naturally, and they're the ones that we're working with. So the fee that we are charging is what was agreed upon by all the stakeholders. So we have the WSP owns, manages, and operates and maintains the facility. These are some of the pictorials of where we have done and the employees who are working on the sector. Come again? It is honey. It is honey. It's not shit anymore. Okay? So that is the tariff. Small tankers charge, medium tankers and large tankers. I'm being told to conclude, folks. Allow me. This is the fee and how we do it. This is what we have achieved so far. 10 DTFs out of the 22. We have realized to customize it for different needs because sometimes we are using topography and land issue is a big deal in slum areas. So we are coming up with systems that actually can be driven by power, maybe solar. So we're experimenting a couple of things. 8 DTFs out of 50 are being constructed right now, and we're actually monitoring them. So we have issues here and there, but that doesn't mean that we cannot achieve the goal that we want to achieve. Lesson learned, folks. UpSub is a tested, proven concept that we have tried, and it's working. And in fact, that is what I convinced our president to make sure that every small town in Kenya has one. We're developing the piloting concept, and it took time, 3 to 5 years. High demand of improved toilets and DTFs. We have been struggling with Bill and Melinda Gates. You have to pay incentive of 25,000, which we were putting in. They are actually evidence-driven. They are going to every toilet and to confirm that actually what we are saying, the toilets that we paid money for, they are confirming that. And again, I also want to say that there were tools that were developed, systems that were developed, and we are using that, and we are just waiting to upscale that nationally. I just wanted to stop there. Maybe if you guys have any question.
Thank you very much, Ismail. Please reserve your questions for the session after. We're very happy to hear about the progress that is happening in Kenya. I personally am very happy. I worked for that program for 5 years. So great to have you here, and thank you, Regina.
All right, so our next speaker on the topic of financing sanitation is Martin Gambrill. We are very happy to have you here. Martin Gambrill is a lead water and sanitation specialist with the World Bank's Water Global Practice. He's been in sanitation, water and urban development for over 20 years with the bank, and he's right now leading the World Bank's sanitation, rural and urban agenda. And he's going to present on water and sanitation subsidies, which is actually part of one of his colleagues' work, Luis Andres, who Doreen and me are working with. So welcome and...
Thank you, Regina. Welcome everyone, thanks so much. This isn't my work. My colleague Rebecca Gilsdorf, who's at the back, and I have been given the task of presenting Louise's work. So the difficult questions can go to Rebecca and the really difficult ones can go to Louise in Washington afterwards, okay? And there are no notes on here, so I've got the notes here, and so I'm going to be all over the place in this presentation. So, what's the motivation of this work that Louise is leading? He's doing this work under the auspices of the UN's World Water Report called Leaving No One Behind, and the World Bank's responsible for the funding and financing chapter of that. And as part of that, we're looking at subsidies in the wash sector. Why do we subsidize water supply and sanitation? To ensure access for all, in theory, and to include the poor and the difficult to reach households through that access. And because we know that sanitation yields a number of positive externalities. So, but why are we talking about subsidies? Because we feel that the historic work done on subsidies needs to be revisited. We need clearer, more nuanced recommendations around some of the traditional approaches to connection subsidies versus consumption subsidies, for example, and are they really getting to who they need to get to? Investigate the possibilities that there are negative spillovers from the existing subsidy regimes around the world, and I'll explain what we mean by that. And so we can move towards a smarter use of subsidies in the sector as well. So, clarifying terms are really important, especially for someone like me who's an engineer and I need everything really, clearly defined. And our economic colleagues sometimes, our economists sometimes confuse us with some of their terms. So funding is about the source of money to pay for something. And that's what we often talk about with our $114 billion a year to get to SDG 6.1 and 6.2. It's about the funding gap we're talking about. Whereas financing is a mechanism for paying for that. It might be a grant or it might be a loan, for example. And we often confuse those two things. And subsidies are part of that funding equation. And once you understand your funding, you can think better about your subsidies and where they go or where they don't go. So we can also be subsidizing. So obviously, it's a public money given to the sector to cover certain costs is a subsidy. But we could be subsidizing capital costs, which we often do, or running costs of a system, the OPEX or the CAPEX costs. We can subsidize through connections, we can subsidize through consumption as part of your, as measured through part of your tariff, for example. But what's important is some of these subsidies are explicit and clear, such as a certain amount of money goes from the municipality to the water service provider. Are very clear, and it can be mapped and traced. Whereas others are implicit and are not clear. For example, many utilities don't pay their electricity bills. Someone's paying for that electricity. It's an implicit subsidy that's going into the water provision or the sewer system. Or for example, some of the staff are paid for by the municipality rather than by the utility. And cross subsidies is where one customer base is paying more for the service so that some of those funds can be transferred to another customer base who are paying less for the service than the average costs. So these are preliminary findings, and this is where I'd really like to have Luis Andres here to explain it to you. From these preliminary findings that the team is looking at the moment and will be further investigated and presented, what we're finding is a large percentage of global GDP, and it's broken up into regions here, is going into subsidies, capital and OPEX subsidies to the wash sector around the world. And these numbers are very significant. This is a percentage of GDP. And when we realize that it's, on average in developing countries, between 3 and 5% of GDP goes into education, and the same amount goes into health, this is a lot of money that's going into the wash sector as subsidies, but only 22% of that is the explicit subsidies I made reference to earlier, the stuff you can trace and you can map and you can put a dollar amount on. A lot of it is implicit subsidies that we're trying to find and expose and say, look, there's a lot of money here that we're not using intelligently or smartly, and how can we target it better? 9% of those, for example, are due to inefficiencies in the sector. And what we find is that how funds are being spent in the sector. From a database, a number of databases, we're using GLASS and OECD databases for this, that public expenditure, this doesn't include what the households are contributing, and I'll come to that in a minute. 76% is going to urban, and 24% on average is going to rural from that subset of countries. And we have another subset of countries where we've broken it down between water and sanitation, and you'll see that 58% is going to water and 42% to sanitation. Sanitation is always lagging. But when we broke that down to different countries, on the left you have Nigeria, on the right Bangladesh. In Nigeria, 81% of sector funding is going to urban. And of that, 96% is going to water supply, and only 4% going to sanitation. In a country that's the second biggest open defecator in the world after India, there's hardly anything going into sanitation. And in Bangladesh, where there's a long history of investing in sanitation, still it's over three quarters is going into water supply, and under a quarter into sanitation. It's a bit better, but still not so good. But what this doesn't count, this is incredible, from these 25, we find that households are actually funding 66% of investments in WASH. 66%. And often, if you have an on-site sanitation system, you are often paying the capital cost of that and paying the running cost, the operation and maintenance cost of that yourself. And what the problem with that is that we're not capturing this, we're not measuring it, and we're not accounting for that 66% properly. And so how can we better capture and account for it? And how can we provide structures and incentives that will use that more intelligently, that will help leverage all of that money? So what we're finding is that there's more bias towards water supply. There's more bias towards big infrastructure in where the funding's going in the sector. And in urban areas, there's more bias, no surprise to most of you here, to sewers and to wastewater treatment. And that means, because wealthy areas are more likely to be sewered, this often results in subsidies targeting the rich in urban sanitation, and poor households being left to fend for themselves and to pay the capital costs and the running costs themselves. And we often, even if we say that we're focusing on the last mile, we're often forgetting the last 10 meters, the actually connecting the household to the sewer system. And there's a number of examples of that around the world, where wastewater treatment plants are not are either getting no sewage or certainly aren't working at optimal capacity because people aren't even connected to them. And there are some interesting programs in Latin America especially, where they've got programs to incentivize or to even subsidize the connection of households to existing sewage treatment works. But what we find in rural areas at CLTS, which is widely used around the world as an approach to rural sanitation, it subsidizes the promotion and delivery of good sanitation, but does not promote the direct capital subsidies. And there's a lot of discussion now going on around CLTS and whether we're capturing all the costs of delivering the software in CLTS and we're accounting for them, or whether it could be better accompanied by some capital subsidies as well for the infrastructure. And another issue that we found in some parts of the world is the philosophy of CLTS is being taken, and someone made reference in one of the presentations earlier to UCLTS, which I imagine is urban CLTS. It's being blindly transported to the urban environment, and therefore saying, well, you shouldn't be subsidizing on-site sanitation because we don't do that in rural areas. However, we are subsidizing sewers, so why not subsidize on-site sanitation for the poorest households in urban areas? These are the sort of discussions that we need to have. A couple more slides, I'm coming to the end. What we shouldn't forget in all of this, because of the inefficiencies in the sector, is that if we're working with service providers in urban areas, we need to think about these inefficiencies that are there, where there are implicit subsidies, because the service providers are not operating, financing, providing customer service, or are not organized in a way that brings efficiencies to the sector. So some ideas to explore and possibilities for moving forward. We could look at subsidizing different parts of the sanitation service chain, breaking it down and understanding where could we better put our subsidies. Could we encourage resource recovery and reuse through our subsidy structure, for example? We can look more intelligently at the intersection between funding and financing. How can we encourage banks and microfinance institutes to help on-site sanitation for the poor who have those solutions? Are there innovative methods for targeting subsidies to key user groups, for example? Could we think about conditional subsidies? Rather than continuing to subsidize inefficient utilities, can we not say, we'll give you some money for your electricity, but get to all the poor households, or reduce your costs by so much? So there are a number of ways we can think more smartly about subsidies in the sector. And I'm just very quick advertisement at the end. We've got a number of sessions this week at World Water Week on sanitation, so come along to them. And I got some flyers here. We're launching a book this week on fecal sludge treatment, and you can win a signed copy of the book. And we've just released a new, if you come, you can get a flyer from me on that as well. And we've just released, Rebecca's just co-authored a book on shared and public toilets as well that we're launching this week. So again, as I say, difficult questions about the presentation to Rebecca, and really difficult ones go to Louise in Washington. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much to both of you. We now would like to open the floor to questions from the audience. We start over there.
Yeah, hi. It's a point for Martin. It's actually just more point of clarification, I think. WSTF, we did a primer on this topic about 10 years back with Barbara Evans, because we knew there were so many questions and so many opinions about subsidies, but not so much information or knowledge. We, in the process of writing that book, came to understand that we shouldn't be talking about subsidies at all. We should just talk about public funding, because that's really what we're talking about. You doing your presentation now confused me a bit again, because you start with subsidy, then you're showing us funding. Seems to me what you're actually talking about here is public funding, not subsidy. So I just wanted to clarify, because are you basically saying all public funding is subsidy? It depends on whether you spend it explicitly on infrastructure or whether you spend it implicitly. It's all public funding, or is a subset of public funding subsidy? I was a little confused as to how you were seeing that.
I think the answer is it depends. But there's a lot of subsidy, explicit and implicit, within the funding. And increasing block tariffs, for example, were introduced to supposedly help households with a cross subsidy. But often, as we know, there may be more people living in a poorer household. They may be sharing the water with their neighbors, so they can actually end up paying more. So there's a funding requirement. There's a funding gap often, which is what we talk about, the 114 billion. And within that, there may be explicit and implicit subsidies happening. But your question's a good one, and I think we need a good discussion around these terms and what the implications are for funding the gap for getting to SDG 6.
Just to say that we've been very much relying on your publication while we were writing our paper on sanitation subsidies. Actually, it's a really good one. So I recommend reading it. A primer on sanitation subsidies. Here we go.
It's just maybe a comment/question, maybe a brainstormer of what you were just talking about. So one of the major issues in the WANA, the West Asia, North Africa region, is that certain subsidies sometimes cause certain behaviors which we want or don't want depending on the region. So sometimes certain funding comes in and shifts a certain behavior, and then the funding ends, and then the local community, for example, ends up thinking about that subsidy and it for a long term, and you don't know, and the whole government doesn't know how to shift from actually stopping a subsidy and then moving on to something else. And then something else comes in where you think about certain policies or donors when they do want to subsidize certain issues and or fund certain issues that the government themselves don't really want, and then there's a shift in policy. So I'm just maybe commenting or brainstorming here. How do we fix this in the future? Because most of the policy recommendations coming into our region, or at least for Jordan in this case, when it comes to SDG 6, is minimizing subsidies that have to do with certain sanitation issues and integrated water management. How do we shift, how do we end this subsidies chain, knowing that there's a cultural and social implication as well? So I don't know, it's just a brainstormer.
There's a session this week at SUI on it's actually unfortunately entitled Taxation in Urban Sanitation, but it's about the whole subsidy discussion as well, and where this money should come. There'll be a bigger forum for us there at that session, I believe on Tuesday, could be wrong, for us to discuss these issues as well, because they're really big issues, and especially when the subsidies start impacting, which they inevitably do, behavior, as you say, and that behavior can be in the utility, it can be in the service provider as well. I'm getting my sewer system subsidized and my wastewater treatment plant subsidized, and I don't care about on-site sanitation, for example. I mean, yeah.
Any more questions? Oh, that was many. Okay, sorry. Who has been raising his hand the longest? Back in the I see.
Hi, I have a question to Isma. My name is Priska from Waste, Netherlands. So I have a question about I think I understand that you have to go fast with the presentation. So I'm just curious about the business model for the decentralized treatment plan. And I really like the idea of this first marriage. Do you get any entrepreneurs to seduce you to be in a marriage as well? And then, and how did you manage to do that? Like, do you already have an existing model on the site to actually convince the private sector in terms of operating the treatment plan? Yeah, that is all.
Right. I think I'm good. Thank you so much. You're right. Again, we got the principle right from the get-go because already private sector were involved. They were the ones who are providing it. That's why I said if it ain't broken, don't fix it. They're the ones who are doing the business anyways, and the water companies did not have the exhausters to do that business. So it worked. But at the end of the value chain is where we are struggling right now. Bringing an entity that can actually use the byproduct of what will come out. For example, if it's fertilizer, if it's briquette, whatever, there are several options that you have. We're struggling right now to do that. But we are not just there and waiting for something to happen. Guess what? There's money in the country right now, and all the donors are into TVET, technical and vocational training. So what I did was, we're trying to incentivize so that encouraging those TVET guys to come up with something, and I know it's going to come. The point I'm trying to make here is we have issues, but I don't believe that's the end of our problem. We are also thinking further, coming up with innovative ways of doing business so that we can use TVET and linking it up to sanitation. And I think that is the buzzword right now in my country, and I'm in it also, doing the same.
Any more questions? I think we have still about 5 minutes until the coffee break, which of course I don't want to shorten for you. Maybe we take this up.
Yeah. Also to the example from Kenya, the question similar to the question before, what is the incentive for the exhausters to not dump the fecal sludge in the environment? And to make a link maybe with Martin's presentation, would there be a case of using subsidies in order to really create good business models that will attract then the private sector to invest in a way that really also makes sense both for the population and the environment?
Thank you so much. I don't want to sound like Donald Trump, but
We hope
It's
not.
the idea of regulation. You know, if you know that you're told, oh, you cannot go here, you cannot go there. So the counties were actually overprotective. Basically, don't dump it in my backyard. If you provide a space where these people can take their shit, because they're getting it from you, so somehow I'm paying for it. I'm one of the victims, I can tell you that. I was told by one person in my village where there was an NGO that was renting my property, and they said the septic tank was full, and they said deposit 100,000 Kenyan shillings in our account before they can dispatch the vehicle to go and do the exhauster for me. So there was that limitation already. In my area, we didn't have an exhauster. I had to go all the way to the coastal town of Malindi and call somebody to do that. But that said, we have also provided space for them where they can put in shorter distance. They're still charging money. So if you reduce the aspect of regulation also and show them that this is where you dump and incentivize it again to charge them less amount. Because remember, if this guy puts that shit in the middle of the road, you have a lot also to take care of later. So there was that incentive to reduce the price so that they can take it to the right place. And I'm encouraging all our governors. In fact, for me, to realize that this program was successful was when I received a phone call from a governor saying, hey, I have the money, come and just help me with the technical assistance. That tells you that the project is getting roots into, where it's supposed to be. So that incentive is available for our exhausters to do the right thing, but is there more that we can do? Yes. Encouraging people to tell them that the role that they can play, creating some sort of an association where we can have that conversation is very important. So we have not exhausted everything for them yet.
I think I think it's a great question, and there are examples around the world where if a levy is introduced to charge for fecal sludge treatment to be deposited at a wastewater treatment plant, that the informal or the formal private sector will say, well, I'm not going there, I'm going to go and dump it in the backwaters or wherever they dump it. Whereas maybe an intelligent subsidy would be, we will pay you something if you come to the treatment works because of the public health and the environmental consequences of you not bringing it here. I mean, obviously there needs to, that could be an intelligent way of trying to encourage good behavior, as it were.
Okay, we have a very burning question here over there.
Yeah, I see a very interesting forced marriage in the works here. And these are these two papers. And I see Ismail saying, on one hand, that the future and the present is permanently going to be on site with fecal sludge management. And then all my years in this business, Martin, it's not you, obviously personally, but everything that the bank represents to me is not that model. Subsidies are going to the cities and the utility systems around the world that are, in fact, part of the foreign aid in poor cities. So where is the harmony and the music there between what Ismail is saying and what you're doing in Washington? Are you on a learning curve there, or are you going to switch over to his model?
So we've actually been working with Ismail and his work with the fund in Kenya. We've now got citywide inclusive sanitation projects happening in, I don't know now, about 10 countries in Africa, which have or will have a mix of on-site and sewers in urban sanitation programs. We have them in Zambia, in Tanzania. We're preparing one now in Mozambique. We have a very large one in Ethiopia. We've just had a request from Nigeria for a big project. So we have our first urban sanitation project that's only on site in Benin, which has no sewers. So I mean, yeah, it's changing. It was obviously, the change was needed. It's much easier to design and implement, because the bank doesn't implement projects, the government does. And it's much easier for the government, the bank's counterparts in governments and the consulting engineering fraternity are much more used to designing and implementing sewer systems and wastewater treatment plants, whether they connect to households or don't, whether they resolve the problem or not, that's what they're used to. And when you then try and get them to think about fecal sludge management, the business models, the financing, the informal sector, how you regulate them, how you incentivize them to do the right thing. It's quite complicated to do that through, as it were, civil works and consultancy procurement, which is what the government has to do to implement the project. So there's a big learning curve for us to do in that as well, and we're confronting it in a number of places at the moment. So yeah, I'm very hopeful. I'm naturally optimistic, but I think there are changes coming, but we're also learning the how-to of this as well, because we've been doing the other way for a long time, as you alluded to.
Very quick, starting from urban, as you said, we are getting it right, and we are also learning mistakes. And we have a middle class, finally, in some of our countries that is coming up that is pushing us also to make sure that we do this. Somehow they are the ones who are actually paying the incentivizing this process. But in rural Kenya, for example, where we are working with UNICEF, the CLTS process, you can now use your M-Pesa to actually buy a nice toilet system from one of these big companies. It's less than 500 shillings, Kenya shillings. In fact, Safaricom is willing to charge you from the credit. So after the process, you can be putting in your credit and you won't even know that we are deducting you from that toilet that you're buying. If you can get, I always say that when you go to Kibera and the likes, there are people who have iPhone 10 and an iPhone 8. So if I'm not incentivizing you to buy that credit, why not also the toilet that you're using every day? So it's a mixed bag of things in life.
There is 2 more questions here, first, here and there, and then I think we need to wrap up.
Okay, thank you very much. Ismail, one question to you. From the 400,000 people out of the systems which are operational now, how many people are served right now? And a question to both of you, Martin and Ismail, the learning on those new systems which are not yet business as usual, but which are emerging, where can we hold track within the SuSanA working groups of the learnings that are emerging out of the implementation? Because there are a number of things which are not, which the fraternity of advisors is not used to, a lot of community outreach to find the right piece of land, and then the details of what we have been covering very slightly here on business models, cross subsidies and so on. So my question is, where can we find a mechanism to turn potential frustration into learning within the community here? Thank you.
No, very quick, I think there were tools that were developed, and I'm glad, by the way, to also give, if you're still working for them, border, because we struggled in the beginning. And I remember asking my GIZ colleague, who did you learn this thing from? And there was that struggle that, we were taught by border, I think that's where they were trained by you. And thank you so much. I'm glad also Tanzania is doing the same. So to come back to your question, I also want to recognize my colleague who used to work for us, and he was also, this was his baby, who is seated there. Folks, we have reached, and I want to announce here, 280,000 people. Although we are disagreeing with how we are counting with Bill and Melinda Gates, basically direct and indirect, it could be more than that, but right now with the evidence that we have is 280,000. We still have up to 2019 to finish, we got the extension to finish the program, and I think we can even reach all those DTFs that I just mentioned that are still under construction. If they are done, we should be able to hit our target. How we share information, tools were developed, even if you check our website right now, UpSub, we have developed a lot of tools, even social animators, even the artisans who come up with the toilets and the designs is different from each area in the country. So we have all that information, but we can still share more. I believe, and I shared this with Bill and Melinda Gates, I told them that the problems in Africa, you don't have to go anywhere else. That is why Ghanaians are coming. You have Burundians, Rwandese, Ethiopia, even Nigeria that I'm expecting in the next 2 weeks to be in Kenya. We are sharing information so that we can all solve our problems together. I think that is the Africa that we want, and the knowledge is still within us. And if we all get together and brainstorm and help that technical assistance, we'll go further and achieve one Africa. Thank you.
So I just add, Stefan, it's a very good question. So yeah, we're struggling with these issues. one of my colleagues, a project manager for a new project in Tanzania, where they're anticipating, you know these, anticipating putting in place 50 fecal sludge treatment plants, and they haven't really, the mechanism of the how and the whole FSM flow and everything else. What he says is it's 20% of his project costs and 80% of his headache, the how to. So I mean, and what we're doing is, so we're getting a lot of traction around the world with what we're terming citywide inclusive sanitation. We had an event in Africa a year ago. We brought together 15 countries from around Africa that had urban sanitation projects, you were there, in preparation, in implementation, or in the pipeline. And we brought our bank project managers and their government counterparts. And then we brought in good experiences from around the world to show them, including what we were visiting at Etequini as well. We did one this March in Brazil for Latin America, and we had 10 countries, and there was a lot of demand. So we actually had some countries coming in from Africa and Asia as well. So now we've got FSM happening as well in a project in Bolivia, for example, and Colombia's interested. So our project managers want things that they can use and move quickly with their government counterparts with. So we're preparing, for example, generic terms of reference for how you prepare and implement a fecal sludge management component under a World Bank project for us and for our government counterparts. Because the consulting fraternity also don't know how to do this. So, you know, we want to be able to, if we've got a generic terms of reference that guides them about all the right questions, not just the technical, but the financial, the business models and everything else. We're putting together some generic terms of reference for condominial sewers. That's often been hidden in Brazil behind the Portuguese language barrier. And we're preparing a guidance note and generic terms of reference for doing condominial sewers in English as well. And we'll subsequently do it in other languages. So these sort of tools, it's a lot of knowledge curation, which was mentioned by SuSanA, and creation. We're going to be putting all this on a World Bank website for our project managers, but subsequently that will be outward looking as well and accessible, and we can certainly work with SuSanA and link to that as well, I believe.
I'm sure that would be very helpful. But very last question before we release you to the coffee break.
So I'm the obstacle for the coffee. All right. Now, I want to strongly back Caroline in terms of calling this public funding and thinking about it more widely. Because what we're seeing, if you're talking about seducing the private sector, even SNV Kenya was saying to me, the problem is that some of these water service providers, they don't have the need to invest themselves because they can find a grant here or there. Yeah, private sector engagement in Bangladesh. Why would I put my own money in assets? Why would I co-fund assets if I can find money somewhere? We need to have comprehensive thinking about how public funding is invested and what kind of behaviors that incentivizes or decentivizes. The word subsidy is so loaded that by using it in this much broader way, I think you be confusing the sector, which is otherwise, I think, a very timely and necessary effort to do.
Good to end on a comment and not a question, so yeah. Fine.
Well, actually, Doreen and me have been discussing exactly that same question, because Doreen suggested that we name our paper Financial Incentives
For the construction of household subsidies.
And I said, no, we should call it household subsidies, because it's subsidies. So like there is two parts to that story, right? And whether, like how you understand it. But I'm sure this makes up for good coffee break discussions as well.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Thank you very much. Please let us convene at 3:15 and enjoy your coffee break.